Well, it's a real privilege for me to come back to speak here. I know that the Lannan Foundation does an awful lot for this community, but I really feel it's important for me to acknowledge how important the Lannan Foundation's support has been for me and for my work. So I'm just tremendously grateful. I listened to that quote from things I wrote a couple years ago, and sometimes I think that I keep writing the same thing over and over again. I hope that's not true, and I hope that you won't find my presentation this evening too repetitive. The title of the talk is Sacred Trinity, and the purpose of the presentation really is to invite you all to think about a set of first principles that have for decades now informed the making of U.S. national security policy, and that, at least in my judgment, have come to be counterproductive and pernicious. Now, for those who seek to capture the essential truths of contemporary American politics, differences are interesting, but it's the continuities that are really instructive. What really matters is not what changes when Republicans give way to Democrats or when President Obama succeeds President Bush. No, what really matters are the things that stay the same. And this evening I want to talk to you about the continuities that have defined and today still continue to define the post-war tradition of U.S. national security strategy. Let's call this tradition the Washington Rules. The Washington Rules combine two elements, each one deeply embedded in the American collective consciousness. We take them as given. They've long since become part of our national wallpaper. Like Memorial Day, marking the unofficial start of summer, or Labor Day, signifying its end, the Washington Rules number among the things we choose to believe, not because they are true, but because they are expedient, or at least we think they are. The first element, the first part of the Washington Rules, consists of a series of assertions about how the international order ought to work, along with the role assigned to the United States to ensure that the order functions as intended. Call this the credo. Speaking to the throngs gathered in Chicago's Grant Park, on the night of his election to the presidency, Barack Obama signaled his allegiance to this credo when he summoned his fellow citizens, quote, to put their hands on the arc of history and bend it once more toward the hope of a better day.
Well, I feel I've almost been in a religious session with the terminology of catechism and credos and faith and dogma, and there's certainly something to that. Gore Vidal once said a few years ago that we live in the USA, the United States of amnesia. And history is largely forgotten or not even taught. You are a historian. I'm interested to see the parallels between Saigon in 1963 and Kabul in 2010, with problematic allies, with corruption rife, with leaders who are deeply unpopular among their own population, and in fact, brothers who are directly implicated in drug trafficking, with Nodin Diem, his brother, and with Hamid Karzai, his brother, Wali. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on 63 Saigon and 2010 Kabul.
I think the most important thing that comparing those circumstances reminds me of is how we deceive ourselves in thinking that as the sole superpower forging relations with a country that we frankly view as a client, how limited our leverage actually proves to be, and how in a perverse way we almost become the client of the smaller state and find ourselves boxed in, and once boxed in, tending to do stupid things. I mean, in 1963, President Kennedy and his administration had very much upped the ante with regard to the American commitment to South Vietnam, well beyond what had been begun by President Eisenhower. And Vice President Lyndon Johnson had famously traveled to Saigon and publicly proclaimed that President Diem was the Churchill of Asia. The problem was that Diem was both ineffective and uncooperative. And as the U.S. military presence grew in size and in demands, Diem became increasingly resentful and resistant to following American orders, so much so that the U.S. intelligence agencies at least believed that Diem and his brother would be willing to cut a deal with the National Liberation Front and potentially with North Vietnam to get the Americans out and have Vietnam's problems be solved by Vietnamese. That prospect was viewed so with such alarm by the people in the Kennedy administration that what follows was U.S. complicity in a coup that overthrew Diem, led to his murder, and then produced chaos in South Vietnam.